So why don't you tell us a little bit about Iran, where it's located, in respect of the other Gulf Arab states?
I think sometimes we presume a lot of knowledge about the people in this room.
Yeah.
So Iran is a very big, very important country. It's got about a population of about 93 million, which is much bigger than any of its Gulf Arab neighbours, including Iraq for that matter. It had this revolution, the Islamic Revolution, in 1979, overthrowing the rule of the Shah, who was a pro-Western monarch, and that's been replaced with 47 years now of an Islamic Republic, which has always had a really difficult relationship, not just with America and the West, but with the Gulf Arab states, the conservative dynastic monarchies. They don't like that regime, but they have come to learn to live with it and basically accepted that, you know, there was a time when they couldn't wait to see it deposed. But now I think the pendulum may well be swinging back the other way. So countries like Saudi, UAE and Qatar, which had urged President Trump not to do this attack, they've been hit and they are really angry. I've been reading the statements, I've been talking to people from the region. They're really angry with Iran over this, with the Islamic Republic regime. And I think they just want it gone.
Caroline, a lot of our viewers want to know why the US has decided to strike Iran now.
Well, there have been concerns for a very long time, as you know, about Iran's nuclear program. But the US has a host of grievances with Iran, and you may know that there have been negotiations, and there was a third round of negotiations that took place last week, and they were being mediated by the Omanis. And it's interesting because the Omani foreign minister who has mediated has said that he is dismayed by the attack. He said that he felt that the negotiations were making progress, and he said, this is not your war. But you will also remember that in January, when protests broke out, they started as an economic protest, they then spiraled into fury by Iranians at everything they hated about the regime. And there was the killing of protesters. And Donald Trump said, if peaceful protesters are killed, we will help, we'll come to the rescue. Now, since then, there has been a big military build-up, which we have reported. So many assets in place. So why exactly now? I think that's a question you'd have to ask Donald Trump himself, because there is a lot of concern about what the ramifications will be. But he said he was not happy with what Iran was saying at those negotiations.
Because as you suggest, that they were making some progress in the talks in Geneva last week. They were due to have technical talks on Monday, and perhaps more high-level talks later in the week. And the principal objective is to get a grip on the nuclear program. That's what Donald Trump initially was interested in. The question is, where is the nuclear program? Do they have nuclear weapons?
Can we get just to one other point first? It wasn't just the nuclear program that the US was concerned about. It was also Iran's missile program. And I have seen it reported that the foreign minister of Iran at negotiations the week before last, he received a letter on the missile file, and he refused to even open it. So Iran said that's not up for discussion, our missile program. We only want to talk about this very narrow issue. I mean, quite a big issue, obviously, but we only want to talk about the nuclear program and what we can do to curb that in return for what is crucial to Iran, and that was the lifting of economic sanctions, because the economy is in such a terrible state, and without that, the regime almost has nothing to offer to people who are upset with it, and there were very many people extremely upset.
I think it's worth remembering that the crowning glory of President Obama's foreign policy in the Middle East was the 2015 nuclear deal, the so-called JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. And that curbed Iran's nuclear program. It opened it up to incredibly intrusive inspections. But then came Donald Trump's first term, and he ripped up that deal in the sense that America pulled out of it. Iran waited a year to see if that was going to change. It didn't, so they then started breaking the terms of the nuclear deal. President Trump ripped up that deal because he said it's the worst deal in the world, because it did not address the bigger problems, well, not just nuclear, but as Caroline was referring to, Iran has a massive homegrown ballistic missile program, I guess you would call it, industry. They produce a lot of drones and missiles, and Israel considers that these are, taken together, an existential threat. So Israel wants that addressed, and there's been a lot of pressure from Israel on the Trump administration. Don't just settle for the nuclear file. They want the missiles dealt with. And as Caroline said, Iran says, no, we're willing to compromise on the nuclear side, but we're not going to talk about missiles or our support for so-called proxies in the region, the Houthis in Yemen, Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and various militias in Iraq. Nope, those are off the table. That's why Donald Trump said he was not happy with the way the negotiations were going. Dr. al-Busaidi, the Omani foreign minister, is absolutely right. They were making progress. Iran was compromising on the nuclear side, but it wasn't prepared to compromise or even discuss the missiles.
Do we know what the state of the nuclear program is? I noted that Rafael Grossi, the head of the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, he was in Geneva on Thursday to lend his technical expertise, but his inspectors have not been allowed into the country since the 12-day war last year. So what does the program look like?
So, sorry, Caroline.
No, go for it.
I'm only going to butt in because I interviewed him at the Munich Security Conference a couple of weeks ago, Rafael Grossi, and I asked him, do you know where the 400 kilograms plus is of highly enriched uranium? So Iran says its nuclear program is entirely peaceful for civil nuclear purposes. And under the terms of the previous treaty, it was allowed to enrich uranium up to 3.67%. That's safe. It wasn't. It was enriching uranium up to 60%, which is way beyond the level that you need for civil power. That's why everybody said, wow, they must be going for breakout capability, where it's not a very difficult jump to get from 60 to 90%, which you need to make a bomb or several. Now, Rafael Grossi said that as far as he knows, all that 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium is still down in the tunnels where the Americans bombed it in Isfahan and Natanz last year, at Fordow rather, in the Operation Midnight Hammer. And he said, my scientists from the IAEA are ready to go down there. There's a minimal risk of radioactivity poisoning, radiation poisoning for them. They know how to deal with it. They've got protective stuff. They're itching to go down there and inspect it and secure it.
Caroline, you said that the president had spoken about the numbers killed in the protests, and he had told them to rise up and take things into their own hands.
Which he's essentially repeated again.
Which he's essentially repeated again. But there's just been a flash from the Iranian side that 201 people have been killed and 747 injured in just this first wave of attacks that hit 24 provinces. And the big question mark, the elephant in the room, is what happens as they continue to pummel Iran. Are the people about to swing behind the regime, or do they take things into their own hands?
Look, the main thing we have to say is there are no opinion polls in Iran because there are no political freedoms in Iran. What has become increasingly clear over the last few years is just the depth and the breadth of the hatred of the Islamic Republic and the regime that has been in place for 47 years. And we saw that expressed on the streets in January. What will happen we don't know. What I've been hearing from various people, I spoke to one woman here in London who'd spoken to her family in Tehran, who said that they were very, very scared. Have you ever seen a military intervention that has resulted in a good outcome and not chaos? She said. And then I've also been hearing from people who are just sort of filled with anticipation, who hate the regime so much that they don't mind if the end of it comes through military intervention. One woman told me she could hardly breathe because she said she wanted to see the end of the murderous Ayatollahs. It's really difficult, impossible to predict how things will unfold now.
Do the Iranians have any friends? Who are their allies?
That is a good question. So in terms of the big powers, Russia and China would be on their side. In terms of the allies that they've been able to rely on in the past, particularly in a crisis and in a conflict, it's the militias that they've sponsored around the Middle East. So militias in Iraq, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, Hamas in Gaza, and then Iran supported Syria's Bashar al-Assad, who of course was ousted in December 2024. So now all of these forces that it had on its side have been dramatically weakened, and that is why you were asking earlier about why now. I think there's definitely a sense in the US administration that the regime in Iran has never been this weak.
But can we talk about the power structure in the country? Who is the leader? Who is the president? Who controls power in Iran?
Right. So the supreme leader is Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who has ruled the country since 1989, and he took over the mantle of the leader of the Islamic Revolution from Ayatollah Khamenei. It's very confusing having these two names very similar, but Ayatollah Ruhollah Khamenei, when he died, he handed over to him. And Khamenei is in his 80s, I think he's about 86 now. He has the ultimate authority because he is presumed to have the authority of God, essentially, or being the interpreter of God's will, as it were. It's a thing called vilayat faqih. It's the system by which the Islamic Republic rules. Beneath him, there is the security sort of Supreme Council, which takes all the big decisions. That the power rests with the Ayatollah, the top echelons of the Revolutionary Guards, who are the kind of Praetorian Guard, as it were, for the Islamic Revolution, the judiciary and the intelligence. And there's a real deep state to all of this. They have got close involvement in a lot of the economy. And this is why every time there is an uprising in Iran, 2009, 2019, 2022, with the Mahsa Amini protests, everyone always says, is this it? Is this the big one? Is this the moment at which the regime falls? And the reason it doesn't is that we have never yet seen a significant number of the security forces, who are huge in number, coming over to the side of the protesters, or at the very least laying down their weapons and saying, I'm not going to shoot my fellow Iranians. That hasn't happened yet. Despite expectations that it was going to in January, it didn't happen. May happen this time, but if it doesn't, I think the regime will survive.
Just very quickly, I've only got about 30 seconds left, but there is a succession plan, and they've stepped up the succession plan in recent weeks, anticipating this attack.
It is not publicly available, so we're not sure exactly what it is. The other thing we should mention is that there is a president in Iran. And so Masoud Pezeshkian, which people may have heard of and think, oh, maybe he's powerful, but he's in the Iranian setup, he's not. He is elected in a way, of course, that the supreme leader is not, but he doesn't hold any power, as Frank said.
So
the supreme leader is the ultimate authority.
And they're actually the foreign minister. They all have to revert up to the National Council.
Exactly.
Absolutely.